we are very fortunate to have Dan Reuben come to speak with us. Just so people know, when we were organizing the conference last year, I spoke to people at my old synagogue, Temple Sinai of Brookline. Charlie Homer is somebody who's been very involved in the housing effort at GBIO, and he suggested this topic, the intersection of housing and climate, because it's not something that we in the climate activism world tend to take a good look at. And then through a mutual friend, was hooked up with Dan, and Dan has had over 2 decades in the intersection of climate and housing, and we're not just talking about HVAC systems. So that is not the majority of what this is going to be focused on at all. It's going to be more, if HVAC is more interior focused, this is going to be more exterior focused, and how housing plays in the community. Dan is currently the chair of Green Newton, and I'm going to let him speak to the rest of his relevant experience, but I am going to mention that in addition to teaching these topics, he's also written a textbook on it. So with that, I turn it over to Dan.
Okay, Fred, do you have a question?
No, just also as an additional introductory remark, Dan, I don't know if you remember, but we were in touch probably 10 years ago in the earlier years of JCAN, and you were instrumental in indirectly in a lot of what we did in those years.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. Oh, good. Thank you for bringing that up, Fred. Okay, I'm going to put my slides up. Oh, what else do I do? Just briefly, I led a group that greened the Democratic National Convention when it was here in 2004. That was the most fun I had in my career. I started a green hotel organization and ran it from 2005 to 2019. Now I teach sustainable hospitality and sustainable tourism at BU and University of Southern Maine. And I'm the chair of Green Newton, and I lead our Building Standards Committee. Housing and climate change, what's the connection? I dedicate this talk to the youngest members of my family, Elliot and Emmett. May we enable them to see the year 2100 and smile. My talk is in 2 parts. It's the impact of climate change on housing and the impact of housing policy on climate change. And I'll tell you in a bit why I think these are really interesting subjects that people don't think about enough. The first part is shorter, the second part's longer. Okay, the first part. How does climate change impact housing? So I was on the board of Newton for Everyone, a pro-housing organization, one of the groups fighting the housing battles in Newton. And one of the leaders of our group wanted the group to oppose the adoption of the specialized opt-in code. In other words, the strictest energy efficient building code in Newton. And I recognized, first it wasn't, she didn't realize that even if it costs a little bit more to build such housing, it'll save money in the long run because the utility bills will be much lower. But more than that, she didn't recognize that climate change has a big impact on housing prices, and it will have a much bigger impact in the decades to come. So I thought, so that's what's sort of behind my impetus for this section. I don't need to tell you much about this. 3 quick slides on climate. The first is the IPCC says, to avoid catastrophe, we need to cut fossil fuel use by 43% by 2030 from 2010 levels and 100% by 2050. We haven't cut them at all. In fact, they've gone up, not down. Despite all the good things happening in the climate movement, and there are, we're still going up. We have a serious, we have a crisis on our hands. I don't need to tell you this. The chart on the left shows how the world is getting warmer. It's gotten warmer still. This chart was up to 2020. And the chart on the left, which you might not be able to see the right-hand side, but it shows that over 800,000 years, temperature and CO2 levels have been gone up and down in concert, and the CO2 level since the Industrial Revolution has gone off the charts, and temperature is beginning to go up with it. 2024 is the hottest year on record, 3 degrees above pre-industrial level. Hottest decade in history is the most recent one, at least in human history. And I asked myself, in 2050, when Elliot and Emmett are going to be 30, what's the temperature going to be like then? And what are the ramifications? And again, for the rest of their lives. Okay, let's talk about the direct impact of climate change on housing. Then we'll talk about the indirect impact. The direct ones are kind of obvious: sea level, coastal flooding, inland flooding, increased droughts and wildfires. By the way, in the news today, if you haven't seen it yet, you'll probably see it tomorrow, 23,000 Californians were asked or demanded to be evacuated because of wildfires there today. Last year, the beginning of last year, there was the LA wildfires. What impact did it have on housing? Well, it damaged or destroyed 12,000 homes. People in those homes that didn't have adequate insurance were made homeless. For those people that needed housing immediately, meant that there were thousands of people and families looking for places to live, putting demands on the market. With the same supply and increased demand, prices have gone way up. In Santa Monica and Venice, they led to 60% higher rents. Wildfires have a big impact on housing costs. Climate change drives homelessness. Over 20 million people are now displaced worldwide by extreme weather events every year. The Institute for Economics and Peace says that number will rise to 1.2 billion per year by 2050. I hope they're not right, but what I know for certain is we're going to go a lot higher than that, than 20 million per year. This will have, profound implications on housing, on human life, on conflicts, etc. In New England, the direct impact of climate change on New England housing is profound. Well, let's say it's impactful at this point. Will become more and more profound. We're seeing coastal flooding. We've seen some houses go into the sea with the increase in sea level rise. As you probably know, sea level rise is rising faster every year. We're seeing inland flooding. A couple years ago, there were huge floods in central Vermont, in the Montpelier area, and floods in Leominster, Mass. The good part of the floods in Montpelier is, as you could see from the picture, it enabled some canoeing downtown. We've seen an increase in wildfires in New England, particularly of late. The initiative, Resilient Mass Finance Strategy and Resilient Coasts Initiative, said recently that Massachusetts needs to come up with $7 to $15 billion by 2050, steadily between now and 2050, to protect our coastlands, our wetlands, and our homes from sea level rise. Will we come up with that money? Unlikely. What does that mean? More people flooded out of their homes or out of their homes because of fire, etc., with big implications for our society. Okay, those are the direct implications. The indirect implications are very strong as well. In fact, maybe even stronger. We will see migration from actual fires and floods and the threats of fires and floods. Those people who have to flee their homes in California today might join the people migrating from California because of the wildfires. There's an increase, and also think about Florida. So much of coastal Florida is just a few feet above sea level. As the sea rises, and it's rising faster every year, where are those people going to go? If they come to New England, it'll raise our housing prices. So migration causes increased demand for housing everywhere, spiking housing prices. Soaring insurance rates, and I'll be talking about this in the next few slides. Climate change makes insurance prices goes up, and it means that some homes can't get insurance at all. And when you can't get insurance, you can't get a mortgage. And if you own a home and it's uninsurable, it's going to be hard to sell. Insurers are leaving parts of a number of states, including the ones I've listed. Some places, yeah, you can still get insurance, but the insurance is going way up and the coverage is going way down. And everywhere, we're seeing an increase in insurance prices. In 2023, insurance companies lost money in 18 states. Similar numbers were in 2024 and 2025. And given the climate crisis, would you want to be in the insurance business? I wouldn't. Let's talk specifically about the indirect impact of climate change on home insurance in Massachusetts. Some homes are now uninsurable in Massachusetts because of where they're located and because of the risk of flooding, erosion, coastal storms. Prevention Web says that 336,000 Massachusetts properties are at risk of substantial flooding within 30 years. That's more than 10% of our homes. That would be a seismic impact on Massachusetts. Massachusetts is studying a buyback programs for homes in high-risk flood-prone areas. So taxpayers would be paying some people to evacuate their homes so they're not going to be washed away. Not saying it's a bad thing, it's perhaps a necessary thing, but it's an impact of climate change. Gunther Thallinger of Allianz, one of the world's biggest insurance companies, says, the world is fast approaching temperature levels where insurers will no longer be able to offer coverage for many climate risks. Flooded homes lose value. Overheated cities become uninhabitable. Entire regions are becoming uninsurable. Abraham Lustgarten, in his book, said, there are parts of the United States that will be very difficult, if not impossible, to either build or maintain a home because of either fires, flooding, extreme heat, or extreme hurricanes. There's going to be 10 to 15 million Americans who need to move in the next couple of decades. So for my message for housing advocates, I'm one, for people who are very concerned about housing and the impact it has on society, for people who want their kids to be able to afford to rent and buy, the message is be concerned about climate change. Andrew.
Thank you for letting me interrupt. I wanted to say in general, insurers cannot insure things that happen to everybody. So that's the problem with health insurance. We all get sick as we get old, and insurers just can't cover it. My brother had a trip canceled. He had this very expensive trip to Europe that was canceled because the flight was going through Doha. And he had gotten travel insurance, but they said, oh, in case of a war like this, we don't pay. Because you see, it happens to everybody. And this is what you're talking about with housing, flooding, and so forth.
Right, it impacts all of us. And I think this is a central climate change impact that we don't talk about enough and that people are not considering enough. So I think it's a huge issue. Hopefully someday we will be talking about it. Okay, section number 2. The impact of housing policy on climate change. This is what really got me to write this talk. As mentioned, I'm a housing advocate and an environmental advocate because the two are tied up together. And in fighting the battles, the housing battles in Newton, I found that the environmental community is on both sides of this issue. And there were environmental people who fight to address climate change and other aspects of environmental protection that were fighting against denser housing in Newton. And I thought, boy, they don't get it. They're either hypocritical or they just don't get it. I think more the latter than the former. But I just think that an underestimated issue, one of the most important issues for addressing climate change, is where do we put housing, and how do we come up with the housing that we need to address the housing crisis in the best possible way for climate change. What does housing policy have to do with climate change? Yeah, a lot. Question for people. You could blurt out your answers. What's the most sustainable city in the United States?
New York City.
Anybody else? Fred?
Let's throw in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Anybody else?
Someplace in upstate Michigan.
Okay. Anyone else?
I would go for Seattle. Much of it is
Okay.
quite elevated.
Okay. Oh, I see. You mean from a safety point of view?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't thinking of that. All right. Well,
Duluth, Minnesota,
okay. And why that?
because my daughter has some friends that did some research on trying to figure out what is the most sustainable for climate. It actually was climate change resilience, and they were
Uh-huh.
looking at certain places, including Asheville and Duluth, and I forgot where else, and they decided to choose to live in Duluth. So that's why I threw that up.
Okay. I was thinking of it not from a resilience point of view, but from what's
Yeah.
best for mitigation point of view. And so I'm going with Deborah, with Deb. The most sustainable city in the United States is Manhattan. Why? Because
That's not a city. As someone
New
who grew up
York.
in Queens, I object.
Thank you, David. So New York City. Why? Because people take transit, they walk, they bike, they scoot, and they live in small homes. And when they live in buildings like this, they don't have to heat their home so much because there's somebody above them and somebody below them. So Manhattan, New York is in my mind, the most sustainable city. Boston and the Boston area is not going to become New York, but we could get closer, and we could lower our carbon footprint per person by doing so. We could enable more townhouses, duplexes, triplexes, apartments, mixed-use development, etc. So this is what we could do to reduce our carbon footprint per person. And by the way, every now and then I see somebody added to the chat. I'm not going to look at the chat. If you want me to talk about it before rather than after, raise your hand or start talking. And by the way, the other thing is, I don't know why my name says Dan. It should be just Dan. Sprawl. The opposite of smart growth is sprawl, because so much of the Boston area, and probably every American city, has single-family zoning on large lots. Where are people going to live? They have to live further and further away. They have to live further from transit, etc., further from their jobs, further from shopping. Sprawl, RMI, as most of you know, is the new name for Rocky Mountain Institute, one of the leaders in climate change, even more important than JCAN. Sprawl is overlooked as, sprawl is overlooked as a major contributor to the climate crisis, which is really what my talk is about. Low-density housing not built near transit sprawl is low-density housing not built near transit, jobs, and shopping. Means more driving, more greenhouse gases, more roads, pipes, sewers, and higher embodied carbon. Probably everyone knows what embodied carbon is, but the intense amount of energy needed to build cement and asphalt for our roads and sidewalks, all the energy it takes to mine the metal and make it into pipes and sewers, etc.
And if I might add, the road building in these communities discourages cycling. It becomes almost suicidal to ride a bike, and I'm an avid cyclist, so I notice these things.
I'm going to add that to my talk the next time I give it. With sprawl, in Greater Boston, we've cut down woods, fields, farms, and converted them to houses on big lots with lawns. We've harmed wildlife, and we have killed trees that prevent them from breathing in and binding up CO2. Heather Hill from RMI says urban sprawl is directly or indirectly responsible for a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. So why aren't we talking about it? We talk about solar, we talk about EVs, et cetera, as we should. But not many people are talking about sprawl versus smart growth. Just like not many people are talking about red meat and its impact on climate change. We need to look at the whole picture. So the opposite of sprawl is smart growth. Putting our homes near transit, jobs, and shopping. Reduce driving, fewer greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, enabling people to drive less, not forcing them to drive more. Diverse smart growth encourages different kinds of housing, putting different income groups together. People that, want to live in apartments, but close to people living in houses. People different household size. It enables, smart growth enables some people to live without cars and to be able to walk and bike and use transit. Less embodied carbon, preserves trees. What kind of housing kills the most trees per resident? Sprawl on the left or the smart growth on the right? Easy answer. So I'm going to illustrate the impact of smart growth by using my own example. I am lucky enough to live a 5-minute walk from Auburndale Center. It's a village of Newton that is near the Pike and 128. If it was today, I probably couldn't afford to live here, but I bought the house a long time ago, my condo. Because I live 5 minutes from Auburndale Center, I walk to all of these homes. I walk to Star Markets. I walk to get a haircut, to the post office, to my dentist, to the drugstore, etc. And so I don't have to get in the car and drive a long way to get to so many things that I could do. The point is, let's build so other people could do the same thing instead of forcing them to live high emission lifestyles. I am lucky enough to live a 1-minute walk from the bus, an 8-minute walk from the train, and a 17-minute walk from the Green Line. I use all of them. If we enable more people to live in places like this, less driving, less traffic, not necessarily in the denser areas, but less traffic overall, fewer greenhouse gas emissions, fewer greenhouse gas emissions. So how do we advance smart growth? First, we enable more multifamily housing. So much of our housing, so much of our zoning is single family zoning. It prevents multifamily housing. It prevents density. It forces sprawl. Allow smaller lot sizes. Don't say you have to build on big lots. Don't say you have to build 3,000 square foot homes on half-acre lots. Offer smaller setback requirements to enable more housing. And the minimum parking requirements, and I will go into that a little bit later. Increase ADUs in Massachusetts now. Newton passed a law before Massachusetts enabling accessory dwelling units, and now Massachusetts has also. For those that don't know, accessory dwelling units are small buildings, let's say 900 square feet and under, to house your adult kid in your backyard or your aging parent in your backyard or something like that. We have enabled them in Massachusetts and stopped cities from preventing them. Shorten the ultra-long permitting process that makes housing so expensive and delays and delays and delays housing. Some environmentalists would say, we don't need to do smart growth. We just need renewable energy plus EVs. We do need renewable energy and EVs, but we don't have either of them now.
Unfortunately, particulate matter comes from brakes and tires. So it doesn't matter if a car is an EV in terms of particulate pollution.
That's true. That's a good point. That's right. That's right. So we need to, there are a lot of reasons for reducing car miles traveled and reducing sprawl. There are many reasons to do it. And renewable energy and EVs they're necessary, but they're not sufficient for the reason Deb mentioned. We don't have 100% renewable energy now. We don't have 100% EVs now. And we need to move on all fronts as fast as possible. To get to smart growth, we need more multifamily housing. It is wonderful because they're a lot more energy efficient than single family homes. They tend to be smaller. Again, they have people on the side of them, above them. I have somebody on the side of me. My house isn't exposed to the winter elements on the east side of the house. So my house doesn't need as much warming in the winter as it would if it was a single family home. Heat rises from the bottom units to the higher units. So if it's an apartment, a 4-story apartment building, the average home is going to require less heat. Reduces exposure to the elements, as I mentioned. And there's less building material and hence less embodied carbon. You don't need as much driveway space. You don't need as much HVAC equipment, etc. Multifamily homes, it was found, use 40% less embodied carbon than single family homes. Parking. If anybody lives in Newton or have been through it, you might know that in Newton, you'll find a lot of fairly empty parking lots around because we have a law that says every housing unit requires 2 parking spaces. I don't know if that law has been overturned recently or not. Certainly, a lot of apartment buildings have applied for smaller numbers and have been approved. But gosh, we have all this parking that is not needed. Now, if you're building an apartment, you're going to build the amount of housing that you need. And if you could get by on 1.25 parking spaces per unit, you've done the math, you know what it takes. You'll build that amount. You don't need the city telling you you need to build two parking spots for every home. Mandatory parking, what I'm talking about is mandatory parking minimums. It increases housing prices because it's expensive to build parking lots. Reduces the land for housing. Instead, we got parking lots. Reduces open space, kills trees. Increases embodied carbon. Asphalt, concrete have a lot of embodied carbon. Increases the heat island effect, makes our cities hotter in the summertime. Trees keep our cities cooler than asphalt. And these surfaces increase flooding. Impervious surfaces increase flooding. Trees and grass soak up water. Impervious surfaces shed water. I want to talk a little bit now about Cambridge and then Newton to give you two different examples. Cambridge, sometime in the last couple of years, passed a new zoning law. It eliminated single-family zoning, as did, by the way, the state of California. No single-family zoning is permitted in California or in Cambridge. It allows four-story buildings by right. You don't have to go through the horrible approval process to build a four-story building in Cambridge. If you provide a fair amount of subsidized housing, then you could build 6 stories by right. Matt.
Yeah, can you explain what single-family zoning is?
Oh, thank you. Single-family zoning says in this particular area of the city, we only allow single-family houses. You can't build a duplex there. You can't build a triplex, a little apartment building. Or you could build it, but only if you go through the special permit process, which will take you years and cost you many thousands of dollars in lawyers' fees, and you'll be paying off loans the entire time until you get that approval.
And in some places like Lincoln, you are required to have a certain amount of acreage, thus reinforcing elitism.
Absolutely.
So statewide in California, like suburbs, which have a lot of single-family homes, I don't understand. How is that? That's not allowed anymore?
It's not allowed to enforce that law anymore. That means you could build whatever, duplexes by right. Now, saying that there's no more single-family zoning in California doesn't mean you could build anything anywhere. In some places, it might mean you could build duplexes anywhere. Or, you know, I'm sure there are different laws for different areas. But yes, it says the city cannot, the city in California or Cambridge cannot stop you if you want to take your home and cut it in two. They can't stop you if you want to build a duplex on a piece of land. So anyway, that's what it means. The city of Cambridge removed the minimum parking requirements. And I go to Cambridge and I recognize it's not always easy to park in Cambridge. You need a strategy for various neighborhoods. But in my opinion, better that. Is the Cambridge zoning law good for climate change? Yeah, very. A couple slides on Newton. Newton has made some progress as well. Newton now complies with the MBTA Communities Act and did it in an honest way. We allow multifamily housing by right in 6 village centers and their close by neighborhoods. We met the minimum. The housing advocates like myself wanted a lot more, but at least we met the minimum. It doesn't build housing, it enables housing. It means housing can be built by right and stops the impediments. Newton has approved a fair amount of housing the brutal way through the special permit process. And also, I assume the 40B law applies around the state. But anyway, it applies in Newton. It says that if you're building a certain percentage of affordable housing, you don't have to go through the special permit process. You have to go through a less difficult process to get your housing approved. And we've approved a lot of housing. You know, if they say we're building an apartment building and 25% will be whatever, 80% of AMI, 50% of AMI, then those projects are more readily approved. Newton, again, was early in allowing ADUs, accessory dwelling units. Yet, around 64% of Newton that's zoned for residential is still zoned for single family only. You want to do more, you have to go through the special permit process. Good luck with that. About 21% of Newton that's zoned for residential is for 1 or 2 family only. So in 85% of Newton, it's zoned for single family or duplex. Multifamily proposals within these zones need special permit. They can't build by right. What would I love to see? And other housing advocates enable by right multifamily housing in and near all 12 village centers so people can walk to shopping. There's transit in most of these village centers. And so they're good places to build. Massachusetts needs a lot of housing. These are the places that we should look to for housing. We should enable more missing middle housing throughout Newton. In other words, relax the single family zoning laws throughout Newton. Reduce the minimum lot size requirements. Reduce the setback requirements, and reduce or eliminate minimum parking requirements. Turning to Massachusetts, Governor Healy, as you might know, if you've been following the MBTA Communities Act and the debates within whatever community you live in, Governor Healy says if we're going to keep Massachusetts affordable or make it a little more affordable, we need to build 222,000 housing units by 2035. And this was a couple years ago, a year or two ago, that she came up with this number. And so some of that housing has been built already. But it's a challenge. It will be a challenge. She came up with a 5-year statewide housing plan. It included the MBTA Communities Act, as we mentioned. And she encourages communities to increase as of right zoning districts. Good luck with that, Governor. I hope you succeed, but I know you have a big fight on your hands in almost every community. Governor Healy created a commission called the Unlocking Housing Production Commission, and they came up with the recommendations. These are recommendations. They've not been approved by anybody, including the Senate and the House. The recommendations are just what I would want, and housing advocates would want. They're consistent with smart growth and greenhouse gas reductions. Eliminating single-family zoning in Massachusetts enables small multifamily homes on every lot. Eliminate parking minimums for new housing projects. Eliminate minimum lot size requirements. So, in conclusion, smart growth is a necessary strategy for combating climate change and enabling our youth to live long and good lives. If anybody wants to contact me about this, this is my email address. And write it down soon, because I'm gonna stop screen sharing in about 10 seconds. Thank you, Fred. Joel.
Yeah, it's the trouble. I live in Weston, and the trouble is, you can agree with everything you say, but zoning is owned by the local community in Massachusetts today. And there's a lot of people in my town who feel like relaxing our restrictive zoning is not in their personal interest. At least that's what they feel.
Yep.
So we also passed the ADU, and we did it in such a way that in the past 18 months or 24 months, not a single ADU has been built. We also have the MBTA 3A. We passed that the second time around, only because they figured out a way where no one would ever build, or very unlikely on any of this. Because people feel like, well, why do I want more housing? That's just my taxes will go up. That's their perception. It'll be more, my property values will go down. My expensive home will be worth less. So there's a structural political problem. It seems that zoning is owned by local communities. Local communities feel like it's not in their interest. And what's to change that structural problem that we're facing? That's my question.
And there are no easy answers. California did it. Massachusetts passed the MBTA Communities Act, started under Governor, I believe it was passed in Governor Baker's time. And some communities have gamed the system, like Weston and Wellesley, and probably a couple dozen others. But the I was going to say, but a lot of communities have lived by the minimum, or even in places like Cambridge and Lexington have gone beyond the minimum. These are big fights everywhere because a lot of people don't want new housing. A person said to me, people should be allowed to live their lives in the communities they bought into. And I said to him, yeah, the farmers believe that too, but if the farmers had their way, we wouldn't be living in Newton. Every generation is going to say that the needs of societies change, and we need to adopt and so I think you staged it well. We have these are big fights everywhere. One more thing before I get to Judith, and that is I say to my students, when was the first zoning battle? And they'll kick it around a little bit, and I'll say, 1,000,000 years ago when there were the first people. Because when somebody said, our people live here and you people get out. And we've been fighting over this ever since, and we will be fighting over land use as long as we have people. Judith.
Yeah, my father-in-law used to say, there are two groups of people in this world, us and them. And it's reconnoitering, right? So here's the question. I was at an ECHO meeting, and this is a very different kind of community than the ones you have been talking about. ECHO represents people in Lynn, desperately need housing. Lynn is even gentrifying, and people who've lived there for generations can't afford to live there anymore. And they are really, pushing new housing. And I'd go to meetings, and I'd say, well, are these houses going to be well insulated? Can we build them on geothermal? Will there be solar on the roof? Will they be just electric? And they looked at me like I had 12 eyeballs. And they said, no, first the housing, then we worry about your environmental crap. And I tried to convince them that it really was the same thing, that the people living there would pay less with the environmental crap, and it would be cleaner and healthier. But how do you tell me how to talk to people?
So here's a thought about this, and people here will have very different opinions about it. Even if Lynn hasn't passed the stretch code, let alone the specialized opt-in code, the housing laws today, what's the word for it? The construction code is pretty good. If you're going to build a home in Massachusetts, it's going to be very efficient. If Lynn did pass the stretch code, it's going to be even more efficient. And this kind of housing, if they build, near the center of Lynn, that has a huge impact. So I guess the other thing it's a tough issue.
Don't sweat the solar, you're telling me.
Don't sweat the solar. And I would say to them, as I mentioned earlier, if your utility bills are lower, your housing costs are lower. And so it makes sense to do that, but build the housing, build the right kind of housing in the right places. David.
A question kind of similar to Judith's. I had written this in the chat. We currently have a leadership in the country that is trying to convince people that climate change doesn't exist, and if we ignore it, it will go away. Any suggestions for how to defeat the ostrich syndrome?
Well, I'll give it a shot, and anybody else can here also, because you all have the same expertise in this area. I used to think people would get it one day. I used to think as climate change got worse and worse, people would get it. I thought to myself after Asheville was flooded, maybe North Carolina's going to go with Harris. And I just don't know how to make the argument. I don't understand. You'd think everybody has young people in their lives. So I just don't know. Does anybody have a better answer than that? It's a tough one.
There is a great book about this and about denial. And one of the things, talk about Asheville, people say, I survived. I survived. I'm building again. I know I can live. I can survive. And that's a big thing. And it becomes this personal strength instead of an understanding of what's going on.
Well, I'll just jump in that I'm not convinced that the deniers have increased greatly in number. There's one with a very loud megaphone.
I'll put it a different way, as similar. Well, I'll put it in a similar way to Fred. The Republican, so much of the Republican Party does not, so much of conservatism thinks that climate change is a hoax. How? I don't know. They must live on a different planet. And amongst Democrats, amongst average Democrats, most Democrats, yeah, they're concerned about climate change, but it's their 15th biggest concern. It's not a voting issue so much. So, or yeah, I'm concerned about climate change and you need to change and you need to change. When I look at my friends who aren't environmentalists, not many of them have done anything to reduce their carbon footprint. And they, very few of them have thought deeply about this, or they've done one thing. But not many of them have thought deeply about this. And so I just don't see many people taking this issue with the gravity that I think it should have.
I can suggest an approach. A lot of people talk about a fossil fuel addiction. And if you study other types of addiction, alcohol, so forth, a lot of the same things people use they're using with fossil fuels, all kinds of denial,
All kinds of denial. And yeah, I don't get it. Deb.
So I'm gonna like throw a few bombs out here because we're like
Good.
closing up, and that's just what I do. The first thing I want to say is that I am an urban snob, and I live in JP, the like greenest part of Boston, which is a very walkable city. I live about 3 minutes away from the Forest Hills train station just because of the way they cut things up when they like rejudged my area. Like it used to be like a minute and a half away. I consider myself to be an extremely privileged person, but it was accidental because I didn't want to live in the suburbs at around the same time my peers would have for their children. And now I find myself not just like with, oh my God, I live in Boston, but I think I'm privileged to not be contributing the same level of greenhouse gases as some other people here. And I just want to throw out that it is a privilege, and that I appreciate that a lot of people who live in suburbs cannot easily move to an urban setting right now. But I don't know what's more difficult, to do that or to turn their suburban, ex-urban environment into something approaching a denser city. Just wanted to throw that out there. Also, we have this housing crisis in Massachusetts, in the whole country, in many parts of the world, and part of that has to do with the Great Recession, which was caused by that variant of real estate speculation. And then people pulled back and said, no, I don't want to build more housing because it might explode on me again. And then we missed building that stock, and now we're seeing my children's generation struggling to be able to not forget afford housing, like find housing. The other thing is that when Joel, when your neighbors are talking about how they want to be comfortable where they're living, I mean, I think there's an elephant in the room as to what modern suburbs are really doing and what they were supposed to be accomplishing. And that is linked to a lot of the things that happened white flight. There's no other way to say it. From our great urban areas that we particularly saw in this area, and that needs to be. You can't address the housing density issue without addressing that. And finally, people wanted to talk about. People are talking about the larger political context. The Jewish Earth Alliance tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. I'll put a link on our website by tomorrow morning. At 8 p.m., they are hosting a talk by Nathaniel Stinnett, whom some of you may know as the person in charge of the Environmental Voter Project. And he has thoughts about how we mobilize people to get out and vote and change things and make this a voting issue. And that's that.
I'll respond to one thing you said, and that is, I think people, at least in the Boston area, will live where the housing is. If there's housing at a good price, they'll move to Boston. If we put housing in the poorest neighborhoods, we'll get more housing in the poorest, more people living in the poorest neighborhoods. Maybe those neighborhoods will then become a little bit better off. We have a housing crisis. And so I think the issue is more where to build and what kind of housing to build than getting people to live there. If I recognize that in a different generation, that wasn't the case so much. Fred.
Okay, thanks. And Deb, just to acknowledge, at least some of your points are deserving of whole programs. You know that. Okay, I was wondering if you wanted to make any comments in the way of comparing and contrasting relative density and direction. So I'm thinking, for instance, I've heard a lot, I talked to a lot of people in Brookline on these subjects, Newton versus Brookline. What are your thoughts? But I'll just mention a couple of others. I was just over the weekend for my 50th college reunion. I was in Somerville and Medford, the Tufts campus. And I was reminded that when I first moved there, the recent census then put Somerville as the most dense city in the country. And I think it's still pretty close.
Okay, I thought Massachusetts, but go ahead.
No, in the country.
Wow.
So and it has, it isn't as though it's gained a lot of green space since then. So it's still quite dense. Anyway, that's my question really. Do you see upper limits? Is Somerville the kind of upper limit that you'd see? And at the other end, one last aspect of this, Weston was mentioned, or Lincoln, those might not be the best examples, but as certain areas densify, are there others that should, what do you call it, where people should just leave? In other words, if you do not have access to transit, for instance.
Okay.
So is it still worth it to have people way, way, way out, however you define that?
Well, I think the last one I haven't given any thought, but I think it's too hard of an issue to ask people to leave their homes and their communities, that people leave when the jobs go away, or it becomes impractical. I don't know. I like being in Somerville. I don't find it to be that difficult. I found other places to be much harder to get around. I was talking to people here, some people here probably know who Pat Jalen is. I believe she's their senator. Matt and I were at a party with her on Saturday, and we were talking about the 24-story building being proposed for Davis Square. And I asked her about it, and she's dead set against it. And she told me her reasons, and I understood her reasons, and I don't want to say them for skyscrapers anywhere. She felt it would have all kinds of bad ramifications for Davis Square, and I respect her. But I think and she said, well, I'm for building. I brought up the argument, we need more housing. She says, well, I'm for building, big buildings in Union Square. And she named a couple other locations in Somerville that are near transit. She said just 24 stories in Davis Square didn't make sense. So I think some things have to be done thoughtfully, but we have to figure out where to put things. and not keep saying, no, not here, not my backyard. Housing is a tough issue, and it's always going to be a tough issue. And there are always going to be two sides. I live next to a church. The church went out of business. I thought, oh, 40 housing units next door. I'm going to hear pounding for 2 years as they build a new place. And every time I try to leave my driveway, it's going to be hard to get out of my driveway. And I would support it, and my neighbors would all hate me. So it's these are tough issues, and we have climate change, and there are big advantages to having dense village centers, city centers as well. I like to go to Central Square and Moody Streets and Porter Square and places like that. They're dense, they have life, they have restaurants. I run into people I know. So it's a tough issue, and you ask two different people and they'll have very different ideas about it.
I think actually a lot of us do have more thoughts and questions, but recognizing that this is 8 o'clock, I wanted to thank you, Dan. We've been working toward getting you here for a couple of months, so yay. And I'm sure most people would agree that we should do this again. We should revisit this again, especially as things hopefully evolve or change. So yeah. Yes.
And if I could say one more thing.
Yeah, please.
I love to give this talk. I think the audience is really engaged. Everyone wants to talk about housing. I think it's really important. So if you find other places for me to give this talk, please contact me. We tried to get HVAC interested, but Abundant Housing Massachusetts, but they haven't responded yet. But if you think of any other place, I'd love to give it again, or find other people that could do it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who came. And this is being recorded, or was being recorded. So if you'd like to revisit any of your own comments, please do so. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan.